Vlog is about World War II. Let us begin. So to talk about this, you must talk about the 1935 Italian invasion of Ethiopia. It went for the Italians, but it would show that the League of Nations, which was like the prototype to the UN, was very weak, and they wouldn't do anything when it actually came time for war. Anyways, in 1936, Germany would remilitarize the Rhineland, this area between the French and German border that was in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. France and Britain didn't do anything. They didn't want another war to start. They didn't want another great war to start. Obviously, they wouldn't. But that would be a catalyst to start this even greater war. And then, in 1938, Germany would march troops into Austria, annexing the country. Again, France and Britain didn't do anything. Then, in 1938, he would ask for the Sudetenland. France and Britain would give it to him. Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, had this idea of appeasement, which was basically give Germany anything they wanted. And then, in 1939, September 1st, Germany would launch an invasion into Poland. They would capture Poland relatively quickly. Poland's a medium-sized country when it comes to Europe. Large, but in America, they're like a state. They're like just the size of Texas, basically. Actually, probably a little less. Maybe Kansas. I don't really know. I'm just yapping. But Germany would end up just knocking out Poland within a matter of weeks. 4 to be exact, but really more like 2. The Soviets invaded on the 17th. That was a two-front war Poland was fighting for a little bit there, and that's a fact I don't think people actually get all the time. Anyways, they split the country down the middle. The Germans had one side, the Soviets had the other side. Then in 1939, still same year, Germany would invade Denmark and take over that country within 6 hours. They would also invade Norway, and that was a very quick campaign as well. The Allies couldn't really do anything. Germany had superiority on that battle, that country. Then in 1940, more in the 40s now, Germany would invade the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium, or the Benelux as it's called. They would march through this region of Europe relatively quickly, with Blitzkrieg. This tactic of lightning warfare, where German troops would march so fast that it would surprise the enemy. It was shock warfare. They would encircle the enemy in large quantities and wipe them out. This was a great tactic for Western Europe, an area of plains, not really forest, not really, and has mild winters compared to Eastern. We'll get into the Eastern Front late soon enough, though. Anyways, Germany succeeded using this, and also they marched to the Ardennes, a area of forest, and the French and the British thought they wouldn't march there. Nobody would be crazy enough to. Hitler was, though. Hitler let his generals do whatever they want in this part of the war. This is something that would come to bite him in the butt later, though, is this tactic, which the Germans like to use, which was very good. That's why they are so good at wars, because they let the generals do what they want if it means they're going to win. If the generals know it's going to work, they let them do it. This was a tactic that Germany used in the First World War, which is why they were so successful throughout most of it, and a tactic they used in the Second World War, which is why they were so successful throughout the first half of it. And then we'll get into why they failed later on. But then, after that, the Germans would encircle the bust armies of the British, the bust armies of the French, and the small northern French town of Dunkirk. If you ever seen the movie Dunkirk, great for you. It's a very accurate interpretation of what ended up happening. The French forces, however, not rescued. The British knew France was going to fall. They instead sent their own army out there, civilian boats, all that, right, made the peerless journey across the British channels. The British left the war, and they wouldn't return to mainland Europe for the next 4 years. Then Germany would end up capturing them, and that basically wiped France off the war. 6 weeks, a few weeks later, France would surrender. And Germany had taken over, that's it. Germany had taken over one of the world's greatest powers up to that point in the matter of 6 weeks. Then, Germany had to invade Yugoslavia because Italy was dumb enough to do the idea to attack Greece. Because, well, let's get into it. First, they took British Somaliland, which was easy for them. I mean, it's in the Horn of Africa. You have to go through the Suez Canal, you have to go through the Mediterranean. It's not going to be relatively supplied easily. Then they went to Egypt. Egypt was kind of like, it's to the British. They cared about it, not really, though. It was more of a prestige thing. But that went, for the Italians. The Italians in this war were very, very bad, but they were ally in this. But then Italy would, of course, not capture Egypt. And actually, they kind of got pushed back a little bit. They did get some land, but they got pushed back later on. So, anyways, they decided to attack Greece to form this great idea of a greater Rome, which Mussolini liked the idea of forming the Roman Empire again. He thought he was some messiah to unite all the Roman people underneath one great empire. He wasn't, though. Mussolini was an idiot, and I would argue more insane than Hitler was. But that is not to the point. The point is, Mussolini and the Italians particularly were not made for a war just yet, but Mussolini didn't care because he wanted to unite the Roman Empire. Then, 1940, I think it's 40 or 41, I'm not entirely sure, I think it was 40. The Italians were just failing this war. They got pushed back into Albania, an area they had annexed earlier, like in 1939, but they got pushed back like further than they actually were. This resulted in Hitler basically understanding the Italians were not going to help him in this war. They were more of a hindrance. So Hitler had to march hundreds of thousands of troops through southern Europe, through the Balkans. He had to march them. He had to do this. He would also end up allying with Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania all at the same time, which would help him later on in the war. Later on is the main implication, because we're going to get into something very big here very soon. This would delay the inevitable invasion of the Soviet Union, or Operation Barbarossa. You know, I've been talking about how like Blitzkrieg and all this worked. This would work for the like 4-6 months until when it came. But we'll get into this later. The Germans marched 3 million men. 3 million men to the Soviet Union. Thousands of tanks. All of this, right? The Soviets actually outnumbered them with tanks. They didn't outnumber them with men. But the Soviet tanks were so bad, they were throwing anything they had the Germans to stop the inevitable. And the Germans made quick gains. They made gains through Ukraine, like capturing the whole Ukraine. Actually capturing one of the 3 main points, which was Kiev, Leningrad, and Moscow. They captured Kiev, which was in Ukraine, which is something the Russians can't do today. But that was really where it ended. Later on, the Germans, they nearly captured Moscow. It was actually, there was a battle for Moscow. And that was one of the main turning points. It was one of the 3 main turning points in the East. That battle saved Moscow. It saved Stalin. And Stalin was, like, terrified. He knew if Moscow was captured, the Soviets wouldn't quit fighting. It's a huge country. It stretches from the plains of Europe all the way to the Pacific, all the way to the Bering Strait, right? It's the world's largest country. It's larger than Pluto. But Stalin was afraid for himself, not for the Soviet Union. But anyways, that's not the point. Anyways, on to the actual point. The Germans never got that close to Moscow ever again. Then, when it came. And when the Germans tried to advance through winter, then midway through it looks like, this is a dumb idea. Let's quit doing it. His din was knew it was a dumb idea, but Hitler didn't know that, and Hitler did not care about it. Then, in 1941, December 7th, Japan would make one of the dumbest decisions of the whole war. It's number 2 to another one that Hitler would make as well. But this decision was to bomb Pearl Harbor. The Japanese and the Germans were friends. They were part of the Axis. They were hell-bent on controlling the world and domination. The Germans were more friendly with the Japanese than the Japanese were with the Germans. Because the Germans would end up declaring war on the U.S. after Japan did. But Pearl Harbor was a surprise attack. The Americans weren't expecting it. Nobody was. But Japan didn't attack the submarine yards, the repair yards, the oil fields, none of that. They just attacked the ships. They did sink 4 battleships, which is impressive. But we could make more. The thing is, let me just put these side by side with you. America was the leader of the second industrial revolution, had the largest industry, had the largest economy, had one of the largest military, could have one of the largest militaries, and did, had one of the largest navies, had millions upon millions of people. They were an ocean away from you. They had absolutely nothing to lose in this war. Meanwhile, let's go in Japan. You had a pretty large navy, an alright military, but compared to the U.S., you have no industry. You can't make tanks. You can't make guns. You can't mass produce at the same level as the U.S. The U.S. could mass produce, and they had woken a sleeping giant. A sleeping giant. So that was one of the dumbest decisions of the whole war, was to attack the U.S. Surprise attack them. That was one of the dumbest, if not the dumbest. But this is probably the dumbest. December 8th, 1941. I'm pretty sure the Germans declared war on the U.S. That was dumb. Because the Germans, they needed to do that. But they still did. That would end up being part one of the downfall. One of the main reasons the Germans failed. And let's get back to the Eastern Front, because we're not finished yet. in 1942, Germany would continue to advance. However, this time, instead of attacking the center and northern part of Russia, they would attack the south into the Caucasus. The Caucasus has a lot of oil, and Germany was running low on oil because you need it for your tanks, you need it for your trucks, you need it for your planes. All things Germans have that Germany is using to win the war with. Well, Germany would basically say, hey, let's go and let's attack Stalingrad. They did. They captured the city. But the Soviets would do a German thing. And they would cut them off from the supply line, which is something the Germans did to them, something the Germans did to the French, something the Germans did to the Dutch. You get it. It backfired for the Germans. Capturing the city and going for Stalingrad without the help of Army Group Center, because it was Army Group South's job to do that, completely backfired for them, and millions upon millions of Germans would end up, no, it wasn't really millions, it was hundreds of thousands, over exaggerating here a little bit, but an entire the Sixth Army of Germany would end up being captured or killed in the city of Stalingrad. And the general, I don't remember his name, who was the head of the Sixth Army, knew this. He was promoted field marshal right before this capture of Stalingrad. But Stalingrad would see some of the most brutal fighting of the whole war. And it was probably the deadliest, it was the deadliest spot, and I think it's the deadliest spot in human history. So we see some of the most horrible atrocities committed, and the Soviet Union would see some of the most horrible actions committed by the Germans. The Germans went into the Soviet Union, wanted to ethnically cleanse the Russians, the Ukrainians, particularly the Jewish people. And Nazi Germany would commit the Holocaust, one of the most tragic, heartbreaking, terrible events in human history. We all know about the Holocaust, right? Let's not deny it. There's no denying it. 11 million people died in this. But because of an idea that's not true, that's not based on any sort of fact, that the alien race is a superior race, and it's not even a race, it's just some white guy with blue eyes and white hair, blonde hair, I mean, it's not. And Hitler believed in this, though, even though Hitler himself was an alien. He was just a crazy megalomaniac. Hitler was the worst person in human history, and I will argue that for as long as I live. But let's get into the fighting again. Particularly, let's get into the Pacific Front. You know, I mentioned Japan attacked the U.S. Well, Japan was also fighting another war this time between China, the second Sino-Japanese War. Japan would commit just as horrible atrocities as Germany did. Actually, Japan went in there, they would decapitate civilians. Anybody who looked like a soldier, they would kill. Civilians, they would kill. They had comfort women, which weren't there to comfort the men, if you get what I'm saying. Some as young as 13. They would commit horrible atrocities. And nobody ever talks about it because, what, Japan's different? Japan committed just as many war crimes as the Germans, and they were equally as bad. Like, Unit like 741 or something. I'll probably put this in post, what unit it was. But they would, experiment on people. And so did another German scientist. I would put his name up as well. They experimented on the Jews. Both sides experimented and ethnically cleansed because they believed that their race was superior. Which is not true. No race is superior. Everybody's created equally. All men are created equally. Don't judge somebody based on the color of their skin or how they look like. Judge somebody based on the contents of the character. But now that that's out the way, I'm just going to have a moment of silence here. Alright, now let's get back into the actual fight. The actual powder wheel war that I want to talk about. The Germans, after this, would never really be the same. And the Soviets had gotten a boost of confidence after this. So let's get it. Also, 1942, the Americans would end up invading Morocco in Operation Torch. This would be the first time Americans would actually fight against Germans. And also the Philippines had been captured up to this point, so Japan and America would basically fight. But also on this time, America would have the Battle of Midway, where they sunk Japan had 4 aircraft carriers, the US only had 3. 1 aircraft carrier from the US would be sunk. 4 would be sunk by the Americans. 4. That's like most of Japan's aircraft carriers. Japan would never recover from this. The Americans, they could build a new one. They could build a new one within months, right? Nothing. It's nothing. Whatever. Japan, they couldn't do that. And this was when America officially won the war. Japan was playing with borrowed time up to this point. And now let's get into 1943. In 1943, the Allies would end up invading Sicily. Then they would end up going and invading the western mainland Italy. Now, the invasion of Sicily went very well. They captured it within like weeks. The invasion of mainland Italy, though, went, because the Germans actually were a part of this. The Germans really couldn't make an impact in North Africa. They could make an impact in Sicily, though. In Italy, I mean. And the Germans saw that the Italians were losing land. They were doing this. And Mussolini was so disliked at this point that he was kicked out by his own party. And then they just went and they signed a peace treaty. Victor Emmanuel III signed the peace treaty with the Allies. And Italy switched sides again. The First World War, it wasn't really a switch. They just knew the Entente was going to win. So they went with the Entente. But this time, they thought the Axis were going to win. Then they were like, no, they're not going to win this. Let's just go with the Allies. And actually, that's really funny for me. But the Italians would end up fighting a civil war doing this too. And Mussolini came back, was rescued by the Germans, by German paratroopers, came back, became the leader of the fascist Italy, and then the democracy of Italy was backed by the US, the UK, all those countries, right? And also, the UK wanted to continue invading through Southern Europe because they thought they could attack Germany through that way. I don't know how. You have to go through the Alps, all that, right? The Americans had the smart idea to attack through northern France. And this is where we get into it. Also, in 1943, one of the main points of the war, one of the major battles of the war, was the Corks Offensive. This was an idea that the Germans could push the Soviets back, shock them, that they could then end up, winning the war and suing for peace with the Soviets. They didn't, though. It was a failed attempt. The Germans would end up losing thousands of tanks in this battle. The Soviets lost thousands too, but they could rebuild. This is something. The Soviets would move all their industry to the east, where it wasn't going to be attacked. And the Soviets had factories, and they were producing tanks. They were producing planes. They were getting men by the millions, by the thousands, by the hundreds of thousands. So the Soviets had a way better military, way bigger military, and even at this point, better tanks than the Germans did. So the Soviets, they were on the offensive for the rest of the war. The Germans had to fight a defensive war in the east. And then, in 1944, June 6th, my favorite part of this war, Operation Overlord. Let's get into it. So, on June 6th, 1944, June 5th, that night, U.S. paratroopers and British paratroopers went into planning, taking out guns, taking out defenses by the Germans in place there. This was actually a very, very rendezvous, though, because a lot of them, thanks to German flak and bad weather conditions, ended up landing where they weren't supposed to be. So it was a very disorganized event. Somehow, some way, they didn't, a lot of them ended up surviving. But, of course, not all of them would, but a lot of them did. Then, we get to the actual beach landings on the 6th. And this is real. It gets epic. At least in my opinion, it does. This is my favorite part of the war. The Americans would end up attacking two beaches, Omaha and Utah. The Canadians attacked one, which was Sword, and then the British attacked, I remember the name of one, Juno and Gold. I might have got the British and the Canadian one confused. But the British and Canadians, they had a much more successful time than the Americans did. The Americans at Omaha Beach particularly suffered thousands of casualties. At one beach lander, they suffered more casualties than the entire Iraq war did. And because the Germans are so entrenched there, that was actually where Germany's defense mainly was. The Atlantic Wall, which is this area of Germany built with coastal defense in mind, because they knew an invasion was coming, they just didn't even know where. It was even Norway, believe it or not. The Americans would end up suffering that heavy casualties throughout this operation. And it was brutal. Brutal for the Americans. But not for the Germans. Now, Rommel, who was one of the best German generals at this time, knew an invasion was coming and wanted all 10 panzer divisions, all 10 tank divisions in France to be in northern France. But Hitler was like, no. Why? They aren't going to invade. It would be dumb for them to. They're invading in Italy. Why would they want to invade to the north? Like, why would they want to, So Hitler made the dumb decision and said no to him. And also we make another dumb decision, a very dumb one this time, and that was making sure Otto Rama, one of the best Roman generals ever, killed himself. Because some people who planned to assassinate him kind of liked him. This is also something Hitler had. Hitler had a huge ego complex. And it got big as the war went on. As Germany started to lose, so did Hitler lose his mind. And, Hitler just said the German free generals, which let generals decide what they were going to do with their armies. He said, no, you're going to do what I want you to do. And Hitler was not a great tactician. He was a great speaker. He was a great motivator. He was charismatic. He wasn't a tactician, though. He thought he was, but he was not. He was not a tactician at all. So Germany, he didn't lose Germany to the war the moment something Napoleon did, but he helped him. He split it up, if you get what I'm saying. He split up the process of Germany losing the war, and especially after the invasion of the Allies by the Allies. Well, the Allies would make slow packers because you have to get supplies, and the Allies didn't have any of that. The Germans knew an invasion was coming, so they blew up all the harbors, which would take months to repair, and the Allies had to rely on floating harbors to get the supplies in. And that kind of sucked because they can be destroyed easily. The Allies didn't really have that many tanks there too at the beginning. They would because, tank divisions arrived and everything. But they wouldn't have that many at the beginning. Then the Allies would, what are you doing here? I don't know what she's doing there. Anyways, the Allies would end up pushing through northern France. And then in August, they captured Paris again. Actually, there was really no fighting in Paris. The Germans just let that end no matter what. Excuse me, I have to see what this guy's doing. There you go. Alright. Anyways, the Germans would end up... Just gonna do self-care. Anyways, the Germans would end up not really doing anything in France. They did try to save France, but it was unsavable. They also just ended up also attacking through southern France, which basically forced them out at that point. Then, in December of 1944, the Germans would end up making another deadly decision, which was the Battle of the Bulge. See, the Allies had Germany thought they could do what they did earlier in the war, which is, encircle them in and push them out. They thought they could do that again. They couldn't. They tried to attack through Belgium during the winter. They actually did encircle the Americans there. And one American general had this paper where he said, surrender or be annihilated. And he thought they wanted to surrender, right? But no. They wanted him to surrender. He said, nuts! Nuts! It's actually a famous quote in World War II. I learned about that when I was 9. It's one of my favorite things about World War II is how, confident the Americans were they were going to win this war. And they had bombed Germany's factories into the ground at this point. Germany could barely produce a tank, barely produce a spear at this point. And then the Germans, this was Germany's downfall. It also, what else didn't help? Is that the German generals started to hate Adolf Hitler's guts. They started to hate his guts. And in fact, they hated him so much that he had to create a new army. The SS. The SS was Germany's ideal fighting force. Now, the SS was very small compared to the German army, but the SS would be sent to help them. They were, these ideology Nazis. They would give their life to save Nazism. I don't even know that's word now. I'm just using it. They would end up giving their life up to save Nazism, right? That was Germany. That was Hitler's idea of man. So the SS would end up, trying to do all they could. Now, the actual head of the SS was a coward. I don't know his name. Not important. The guy sucks, though, right? The SS is also in charge of the concentration camps, which means you don't like them even more. But the SS failed, really, because it was introduced later on in the war, right? Well, at least it was fighting later on in the war than it was before. Then the Wehrmacht kind of hated get to this point, and you would see this divide between the SS and the Wehrmacht, where the SS was more towards Hitler, and the Wehrmacht was more towards Germany itself, and more towards the people of Germany. We'd also see a World War I type collapse with the Germans, where mutinies and everything started happening, and German troops which went to the Allies, they would fight against the Soviets, because you would rather be a prisoner of war to the Allies. They treated you more nicely, but this would end up happening. There was also the Warsaw Rebellion, and then Warsaw would end up being freed by the Soviets. Then the Soviets weren't really liberating the land they were capturing. They were liberating it in the sense that they were liberating it in the sense that they were just turning them into communist puppet states, right? a lot of countries actually just submitted to the Soviet Union instead of being taken over by them because they would rather be a Soviet puppet state where they have to abide by by the Soviets' foreign policy, somewhat of their internal policy, than be a Soviet state. Because Stalin was that bad of a dictator. Yes, Stalin would end up killing more people, but Stalin also ruled for like 20 plus years. Hitler only had 6. Imagine what he could do in 20 years. Then, Hitler... I bought this, by the way. She's in this. Yep. I'm not kidding this, by the way. This is a final take. I'm not doing anything else to this. So, yeah. You just made your cameo in the video. Oh, you want to make another one, too? Huh? You want to make another cameo? This is my cat Phoebe, everybody. Yeah. Again. I don't know. Anyways, the Soviets. Let's get into this. The Soviets ended up getting promised Berlin by the Allies. The Allies, they knew the Soviets wanted Berlin. They weren't gonna take it. So, on April 20th was Hitler's birthday. 10 days later, the Battle of Berlin would end, and Hitler was found dead. The Battle of Berlin was one of the deadliest battles in human history. The Soviets, I think, started the battle like a week before they actually captured the city. But one of the most famous pictures in all of history was taken as well, which is, of course, oh my goodness. Yeah, can you move, Kitty? Can you move? Please and thank you. They would actually end up capturing the city of Berlin and found Hitler dead April 30th, like I said. But one of the most famous pictures was taken. The Soviet flag over the Reichstag, or the Reichstag was the German Capitol, what it's called, was this basically settled Germany's end. As May 5th, only 6 days later, Germany would end up surrendering to the Allies and the Soviets. And now, let's focus on Japan. The U.S. started island hopping in late 1940. This was a tactic where they would go island to island, capturing it, and eventually going the way to the home islands, the main islands of Japan. The invasion would never come, though. But the Americans would end up, I think, sometime in April, capturing Okinawa, which was the closest island they had actually gotten to mainland Japan, which allowed them to start doing bombing runs. They did the firebombing over Tokyo, which killed more people than the actual bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now let's get into this. On August of 1945, 2 nuclear bombs. The only time in human history a nuclear bomb has ever been used on a civilian target. Just actually been used, not as just a test, but as an actual bomb, was used on 2 cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It would be one of the most immense and disrespectful things in human history. But the conversation to this day is, why did we do it? There's people who say we did it to end the war. There's other people who say we did it to strike fear in the Soviets. There's still conversations of why Japan surrendered. They did it because the Soviets declared war on them. They did it because they didn't want to get bombed. Mix of both. Like most things in life, it's a mix of both. I do think the Americans did it because they didn't want to invade the home islands. But I mostly think it was because they wanted to show the Soviets, we don't mess around. We are willing to fight you with these new bombs. We'll bomb every city you have. Like, they didn't know how many they had. The Soviets knew they had the bomb, but they didn't know how many. So, like, oh my goodness, he almost followed. Okay, anyways. So, as I'm saying, oh yeah, what? Great place to walk there, cat. Okay, as I'm saying, the reason I like World War II so much was when I was a young kid, I learned about it, right? When I was like 4, I knew what World War II was. And when I was 9, I really started getting into it. And I remember in the 3rd grade, I knew a lot about it. I actually remember I was talking to one of my teachers about it. I was talking about what I knew about it. I didn't know as much as I do now. I've learned most of the stuff out in the past 3 years, maybe 4. But, like, I went through a phase, right? When I was 9 to 10, that's all I could think about all the time was World War II. But my parents thought I knew more about geography than I did about World War II in history. But then when I was 12, I should say, I really had to switch from, like, geography and history to history, particularly World War II. And if you know me, you know I know a lot about history, right? And I know a lot about American history, particularly. And I know a lot about American history and World War II. I know a lot about it, right? I don't know every ship. I don't know all of this, right? But the reason I like World War II so much, the reason I made this video about it, is because to me, it's always been something I can rely upon, because it's not like, it's not open, it is open for somewhat interpretation, like, a lot of it is, but it also can be written about. You can have historical fictions about it. Plenty of TV shows done this, like Band of Brothers. But you can also just learn about it. This is the reason I've always liked history, is because it happened, and it's not an unknown. It's one of the main constants. It's like a constant of life, is that there's always going to be history you can go back and fall back into. I just love learning about history, and I love the fact that I'm living in history, that future generations will learn about what? The COVID-19 pandemic, maybe this Russian-Ukraine war. They will learn about stuff that I didn't get to learn about because it didn't happen. And I know history's going to happen because I'm living in history. I could be living history. Most likely won't, but still, I could. And this is why I like history. And the reason I like World War II is my dad liked World War II. My dad introduced it to me when I was young. And my dad knows a lot about it too. And I've always liked World War II. I always known about it. And that's all I really have to say. That's why I like World War II so much, is World War II is something I was introduced to when I was very little. And I got way more information about it when I was 9. And then when I was 12, just falling in this rabbit hole, and I've watched hundreds of hours about World War II. If you translate those hundreds of hours that I've watched about it, if I got a nick of every, 10 hours I've watched about World War II, I would be a billionaire, right? I just love learning about history, and I love learning about World War II because it's the big bad boy in history. Everybody, the Roman Empire is fun to learn about. World War I's fun to learn about. Everything's fun to learn about in history, but to me, World War II is always the one thing that you're going to look forward to. And every class I take, every history class I take, I always hope that I get to talk about World War II. And it's just fun. Every time history gets brought up, I always mention about World War II because I know so much about World War II, and then I know a lot about the Cold War as well, which probably will be the next video I make.